Well, good morning, folks, tag members and members of the public. Welcome. This is a meeting of a subgroup of an ad hoc subgroup of the technical advisory group for the clean heat standard. We're here to discuss, well, to start thinking about all the issues in front of us, measure characterizations, emissions factors, so on and so forth, prioritize the issues and get down to work on figuring out where we stand on them as a group. So with that in mind, we've got Catherine Morris, as always, our faithful and more than capable facilitator. There are, I think, about, 8 or 9 of us right now. Michelle is with us. She's just joined. We have a process we want to start on. I might just turn it over to you, Catherine, to describe it. But before I do, I just want to make sure. I want to ask the group if there's anything in particular you want us to keep in mind for today. Are there any issues that perhaps we might not be aware of that you want to raise? I'm sure they'll come during the discussion.
Like topics we want to discuss, Rick?
Yeah, well, the answer to that is yes, but I think actually after Catherine explains how we're going to go through this, you'll get an idea of what we think the major topics will be. And if there are things to add, by all means. So Catherine?
Well, yeah, Brian, you wanted to invite somebody else. Who would that be? Are they on yet, or they need to join later? Or because we don't really have an order of the topics, you asked for some idea of how we're going to go through. I'm not sure yet. What we will know a little bit later in this process.
Yes. So Molly Willard and Catherine Servideo from the Forestry Division are planning to join. I think they were. Let me go back to their email. I couldn't join for the whole section. Why don't you go on? I'll drop their schedule in the chat so we can move forward.
Yeah, loose. Anything we need to keep in mind as we're starting this process?
Right. I can only be on for about an hour on this one, but Ken had sent an email yesterday, and I actually tried to do couple of examples using the algorithms. And, I just would love to see, we could talk about how this could be a lot easier. I tried to do some macros in a spreadsheet so that you could easily do drop-down menus. And if you pick this, boom, there's your heat credit, right? And it's challenging. So I'm just bringing that up. That's all.
Great, thank you. Let me just say one other thing. Our usual, I ask everyone to keep muted unless they are speaking. I use the raise hand function to get in the queue. Members of the public, as always, we are grateful if you keep your videos off until and unless we have a public comment period. So with that, and everybody, of course, muted, as I say. So with that in mind, Catherine?
Yeah, so Rick and I have been working on trying to think of a way to organize the conversation, and we created this whiteboard, which hopefully you can all see now. Yep, and you can all move around it. So we pre-populated this. We tried to organize it by obviously the installed measures, delivered fuels, and all measures, categories where decisions need to be made or options need to be developed.
Catherine, may I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
I don't see the whiteboard. Do I need to click on something, right?
Does anybody else? Because it all says you're following me. Does anybody see the whiteboard?
I do see the whiteboard.
I do.
Okay. Yeah. I do now. Sorry. I see what happened. I'm, operator malfunction.
So as Rick said, so the purpose is to go through the TRM and decide where we want to focus our attention on developing alternative options for discussion for the tag. So we're kind of past the question and answer. We have got a lot of outstanding questions still in front of OD. We didn't get the answers in time for today. We're not trying to re-raise those questions. We're trying to actually, through this prioritization process, pick the topics that we think are most important for the tag to actually take a position on, or an alternative position on, than what is being presented in the TRM, the draft TRM, I should keep refer to it. So I just organized it in terms of installed measures and the headers that are in the TRM. So they have information about each installed measure that addresses these green topics on your left-hand side. Delivered fuels are organized by the type of delivered fuels, and I pre-populated that with some of the things that you have already raised in earlier sessions or conversations or sent to us via email. And then all clean heat measures, these are things that are still outstanding in the act that the tag is required or has been asked to weigh in on.
Catherine, can you scroll down? Just the headers are like underneath some other things on my screen that I can't seem to get rid of. If you just scroll down like 2 lines, we could see the headers.
I think you are the one who has the capability of scrolling yourself.
Oh, okay.
You can move it wherever you want it.
That's
Make
right.
it bigger or smaller, so you can adjust your own screen, I hope.
Okay, I will attempt to do that. Oh yeah, okay. Oh shoot.
You're moving it for all of us, but
Yeah.
so what I was hoping we could do is use this as a way to capture any additional issues you want to be sure are raised for prioritization, not for discussion immediately, but just you want to get them on this list. We have an exercise where I'm going to ask you to vote on 3 of these that you think we should start with. It doesn't mean we're eliminating anything. It just means we need to sort of start the discussion there, and we'll see the voting results and pick those. And then we'll move to the actual discussion of, what you think should be an alternative to what OD has provided us. And of course, we are missing information. So, we know that some of these might have to still be determined because we don't have enough information to decide, and we should note that. But let me start there and see if this makes sense to you first, if I need to do a little bit more explanation, clarification, or if you have any questions.
Let me just add one thing, Catherine, and thank you so much. And many thanks to Catherine for really giving a lot of thought to this and putting this together. So we hope this works, this process works. Let's give it a whirl. At the end, whether today or during the tag meeting next week, this exercise will produce assignments, work tasks for members of the tag, because we expect that what will come out of this will be clear differences of opinion about certain measures, certain emissions factors, or whatever, certain various elements of the TRM that the tag is going to have to grapple with. And what we're going to want will be very concise statements from those who feel that X should say this or X should be that, that we can then deal with and address. And ultimately, I think where this goes, somewhere down the line, maybe beginning at our next meeting, but certainly within the next few weeks, we make decisions about, we take votes on. I hope that much of the TRM we can be satisfied with. Generally, it's okay, but there are obviously, we spend how many months discussing obvious differences of opinion on certain matters, and we're going to have to confront them through some kind of deliberative and voting process. And that will be greatly aided by concise statements on the issues that we will be, that are contentious. So that's where I think it's going. We'll see. Catherine, is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of this meeting, we will hope to be making assignments on two individuals who say, I think this needs to, be the option that the tag considers as an alternative. We'll need to have that written up for the next tag meeting for discussion. Yeah, Emily, 11.
That I like this approach. I think this is helpful. It's not what I thought we were doing in this meeting, which what I had thought we were. So I just want to make sure I understand correctly, because from my perspective, we had sort of surfaced a bunch of questions for OD, many of which they still haven't responded to, and we're waiting on responses related to the delivered fuel carbon intensity issues. We've also surfaced some areas of potential disagreement that probably needs some further delineation. I totally agree with that. I thought the intention for this meeting was to do a similar process on the installed measures, which we haven't reviewed yet, so that we were prepared with like a list of questions for OD at the next tag meeting about the installed measures. And then I guess I hadn't gotten so far as to like think about how we were going to wrap that up into a tag statement or like list of tag disagreements or whatever that might be, for including a lot of which I think could relate to the delivered fuels assumptions. So can you just help me understand what the desired process is around installed measures, and is one of our goals for today's meeting to identify questions for OD on that, or are we not doing that at all?
Rick, you want to take that, or?
Well, we can. We can make that part of this. I hadn't thought that we would be doing that since we had, in fact, dealt with a number of the installed measures previously, but obviously there are more and they've been refined. We're going to do a little pivot here and say, yeah, well, if there are questions that we want to ask OD, we'll take them down. We can either do that on the whiteboard or I can do it by hand and send them on the various installed measures. But
do you mean because we got to see them when they had the early win deliverable?
Yeah, we did a lot there. We don't have them all. I understand. So, but yeah, if it sounds like I've failed to keep that in mind, if questions come up that we have for OD, and there certainly should be because there's so many holes in the TRM still, we'll take them down and forward them right away.
Okay,
So
thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Just a question, Emily, do you think that it would be helpful just to do that first before we go through, or do it as we go through this exercise? Because I think what I was assuming we would do is just say, okay, eligibility criteria. For those of you who have, hopefully reviewed the draft TRM, are there any eligibility criteria that raise concerns for you?
And in that part of if we start with installed measures here, we can in effect do both. We can identify questions without necessarily deciding that there's an issue that has to be resolved yet until we hear from OD.
Yeah, does that work, Emily?
I think so. And just to make sure I have a complete understanding of how this is supposed to unfold, what do we think OD is doing at the next meeting? Is OD coming to present the
Very good question. I have that sort of as an outstanding question to ask Deirdre. Are they planning to attend in order to respond to or help, with the discussion, or to make another formal presentation on the overall TRM? Because they haven't done that. So that's it. I would hope that indeed they would be there, but I have not gotten that confirmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I think your approach can work if we've all done our homework. I confess to have not completed my homework. So I don't know if everyone else feels prepared that you would be able to immediately surface any questions if you ran through it this way.
Well, we'll start. And then this is a subgroup meeting. It's meant to, make our work at the full meetings more efficient, but we'll be back again in a week, addressing presumably many of the same issues. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I think you should give yourself a pass. I don't think you are unprepared. You're prepared for the meeting you thought was going to happen. So I think that's fair. And I admit to saying my focus has been more on the emission factors than it's been on the TRMs, because my understanding is similar to Emily's. But I'm willing to forge ahead.
Okay. Well, let's have the discussion. Let's have those discussions. Let's start with those discussions.
So let's start with the installed measures. And if that's as far as we get, I guess that's as far as we get, and maybe we'll have time for another subgroup call, or that will be our focus on the next tag meeting. Yeah, Ken.
So for installed measures, I just want to note, for me, there were two that were missing. And one is the topic of new construction. While there's the manufactured homes one, I believe the legislation wants us to look at new construction. And the second, they include wood stoves, pellet stoves and conventional stoves, but only as a replacement for other wood burning items, and old wood stoves replaced. And so what is a wood stove that's replacing a fossil fuel stove, is that going to be included as a measure?
Okay. I am taking notes and you're taking notes, right? Rick, okay. And we will turn these around so that you can make sure that they're comprehensive, or you can add to them after the meeting. Okay, great. Yeah, Emily, Roscoe?
Thanks, Catherine. So Ben Plotzker from Efficiency Vermont typically does the deep dive work in the Vermont TRMs. So I'm speaking on behalf of him, but I may not be able to answer any follow-up questions. So just flagging that. He will be at the next meeting. The one thing he wanted to flag based on his initial review for installed measures was for the ductless, and this is going off of that spreadsheet that was sent alongside the main TRM document. I think it's called, just the Vermont Clean Heat Measures Parameter Changes from Vermont TRMs. So for the ductless, ducted, and air to water heat pumps, and then the air source heat pump measure in that spreadsheet, it looks like Opinion Dynamics adjusted the equivalent full load hours for all of them. The EEU and the Tier 3 TRM are linked to the 2017 Cadmus heat pump evaluation findings, and just wanted to note that the EEU and the Tier 3 TRM will not be able to adjust until the next heat pump evaluation is completed. And then as Opinion Dynamics is proposing, they're increasing savings substantially from what EVT and the Vermont distribution utilities could claim for an air source heat pump. So I don't think we have a clear recommendation right now, and Ben can continue to think through this and share more on Thursday's tag meeting, but mainly just noting that the TRMs are not aligning with the existing TRMs, and the Clean Heat Standard TRM would be awarding more savings for the same measure in the same territory. So flagging.
And you said when will be the next change to the EU and Tier 3?
I believe that's happening maybe next year. I don't have the exact timing of that, but I think that it's someone from the department might know, but I think it's within a year or two in terms of the next heat pump evaluation. I'm not completely sure.
All right. Put a question mark there.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah, Emily Levin.
Sorry. While we're identifying, maybe the first step is any measure missing, like Ken went to. I wanted to suggest a measure for like a window heat pump, which is sort of a rapidly emerging technology category with a lot of potential applications in apartment buildings. I can send more information about these, but you know, I don't think that's a measure that would require, like, we would want to require a very custom approach for it. Seems like something that would be pretty easy to do through a prescriptive TRM. So I guess I'm requesting a measure addition.
So it's like a window air conditioner, but a heat pump,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Matthew?
I'm not sure if I've missed it, but I don't think there's a comprehensive weatherization measure. So that should be added in.
Comprehensive, what do you mean? Make sure I understand what you mean by that. Earlier, they didn't have air sealing. They've added air sealing now. So, I'm sorry.
Sure. So like the weatherization assistance service type project where it's the entire building shell, air sealing, insulation, so on and so forth. I expect that it would have different savings because it's most likely going to be based on the current practice, which is pre blower door tests and post blower door tests, excuse me. And I think in general, the results of those types of projects are significantly higher savings than what's accounted for in the EBT TRM. So it would be a different calculation based on past performance of that type of project.
Okay. Luce.
Yes, just, I believe, and I'm trying to find it now, but they had only outside pools, and I'd like to add inside pools to this, because I think there's an opportunity there for huge savings. So for, you know, schools that have indoor pools. Thank you.
All right, got it. So those are a lot of the missing, what folks that see as potentially missing measures that should be included. Floyd.
Yeah, a potential measure would be liquid fired home heating appliances. So these would be ones focused on using 100% biodiesel or 100% renewable diesel or some blend of the two. So I don't know if that fits in the installed measures or fuels or both. Since it involves an appliance, I would think it would be an installed measure.
So it would be conversion too. It would be the actual appliance conversion, like the furnace conversion or the boiler conversion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there are retrofit kits for those as well as purpose made.
Okay. Yeah, Emily?
This is just a question for anyone who's had a chance to review this in more detail than I have and who's more familiar with commercial technologies. I tend to be more focused on residential. Are any of the commercial, the CNI heat pump measures designed to replace a rooftop unit? Like, do you feel like a rooftop unit measure replacement is included in this TRM?
Can be a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so our rooftop heat pump. Was that it? Rooftop heat pumps included.
An option that would replace a fossil fuel rooftop unit.
Oh, an option, a heat pump option.
Yeah, it might not. That's sort of my question. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, there are various heat pumps and VRF measures for CNI, but I'm not. That would be a common replacement scenario, and I just wasn't sure.
Okay. Okay, got it. Other questions like that? Any other questions generally about what you saw in the TRM for installed measure? Matthew?
Kind of like Ken noted for wood, they only had wood to wood replacements, but I think there's at least one measure where I think electricity should be a baseline, commercial clothes dryers. If it's going to be considered a baseline for most appliances, it should probably be a baseline for any appliance that could be energized with electricity.
So I'm not sure I completely understood that. So the baseline would be from what you're changing. And you're saying, is there something missing in the baseline assumptions?
Yes, so in the installed measure TRM item number 2.1.1 heat pump clothes dryers, there is no electric baseline condition for that measure, but for the other clothes dryer measures, for example, electric is a baseline condition.
Okay.
So if electric clothes dryers are the baseline, what would we be switching to?
A heat pump
A heat
version
pump?
of that
Oh, yeah,
appliance.
that's what yeah, okay, just to be sure. Yep. I thought so. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Emily, did you have another question? Okay.
No, sorry.
So Rick, you pointed out to me earlier that there have been some changes in the CIs for some of these installed measures since the first draft we saw. I'm wondering if other folks had a chance to look at that more closely and had any questions regarding those changes. Floyd.
Sorry, I was a little slow on the draw here.
Go ahead.
I did have a couple of questions. If we're taking questions on like, moving ahead on the TRM thing. I had a question on table 2, which is the transmission and distribution losses and carbon intensity adders. I looked through the document. I couldn't figure out what the adders were for. I mean, transmission and distribution losses are supposed to be factored in the overall life cycle assessment. So I'm not sure what an adder is needed for. And then, I'm not sure what transmission and distribution loss is associated with fuel oil distribution. I'm not aware of massive pipeline leaks for those or truck leaks. So if someone could explain to me what that's supposed to mean, I appreciate it. And the second question is following that table, which is custom measures. I know it'll be added later. I don't know what it means. And there is some, question about what that means for, I know this is for installed measures. I guess my question would be, would there be something similar to that for delivered fuels? The question pertains to commingling of either feedstocks or finished fuels. How would the TRM deal with that? I guess my recommendation, unless they're thinking otherwise, would be to kind of keep this as simple as possible and avoid the kind of California approach for bespoke pathways for every facility that produces fuels. I think the experience in California is that has been hugely resource intensive, and I just can't foresee that working in this state. So if we could think about how to take pathways and approach them as kind of a modular approach. So if a delivered fuel is 50% waste oil and 50% soybean, then you just take the two pathways and weight them by 50% and you're done, or something similar to that. That's makes sense, easy to grasp, all of those good things. So anyway, that may be a question raised when fuels are added to this, but just thought I'd tee it up at this point.
So your first overall question is, how are the custom measures, what is that going to be used for? What is the purpose? And if there are going to be custom measures applied to mixed biofuels, for instance, you would say, don't do that. Assumptions.
The question is that a custom measure, or should the TRM specify an approach for dealing with combined pathways?
Makes it more of a standard measure.
Yeah. And then the question on the adders, what exactly is that and why is it needed?
Right, got it. Anything else come up for folks in reviewing the installed measures portion particularly? Ken, you noticed I got your comment that you sent via email about ensuring that the tracking progress approach is based on data that is actually, I want to make sure I captured it correctly. It is based on data that's actually being collected through the Efficiency Vermont programs.
Yeah, Efficiency Vermont and others, any of the folks, and actually one of the bigger ones is going to be the weatherization topic. I think I raised it during the first part. Insulation, to measure the square foot of insulation on each of the different surface types. I just don't know if anybody collects that. And if that's going to be the basis on which to estimate the credit value, okay, but again, it's that is there a disconnect between what people are actually measuring in terms of the installation and how we're going to calculate a credit? Because if you don't have the data, you can't calculate the credit. And while I'm speaking, there is one other kind of general topic, and that is in some heat pump hot water heaters is the example. To convert from an electric hot water heater to a heat pump hot water heater, they do not consider that eligible. And yet there are many other cases where the reduction in electricity use is included in the calculation of the credit, because electricity still does produce some carbon intensity. So, that inconsistency, and again, because heat pump hot water heaters is going to be a measure that is installed thousands of times, that inconsistency, who gets to determine whether some installed measures that have an impact on electricity use are considered as a creditable activity and some are not. Is that clear? I can see
Rick is
Catherine,
saying
not to you.
yes. I'm hoping he can.
Someone else want to give it a shot?
I think I understand. Yeah, you pointed out an example of what you think is an inconsistency. It seems to me you're actually raising the same question with respect to, in this case, domestic hot water that Matthew just raised with respect to C&I commercial hose dryers. In other words, there's an electric baseline that should be recognized. In that
Yeah,
case.
maybe to state this in the form of a more like philosophical question. I think it might be, or the way that I'm interpreting this is that there are some electric associated greenhouse gas reductions that we're capturing in our net for measures that have both electric and fuels impacts. But should we also allow counting of fossil fuel reductions from electric only replacement measures, like if there isn't a co-commit fuel reduction? Is that sort of another way to ask that question, Ken?
Yep.
Not trying to answer it, as you will observe.
Emily Roscoe.
Just going back to Ken's program data tracking recommendations piece, that makes sense. And for next Thursday's TAG meeting, Efficiency Vermont is having internal discussions about, what we can share on that. That would be helpful.
Great.
Yeah, and if I could tag on to that, I would also request that Efficiency Vermont very carefully review the TRM for any different assumptions. The spreadsheet they made is helpful with the significant parameter changes, but as I'm reviewing the TRM, I'm finding countless things that I would want to double check with EVT, like, is that the same switchover temperature you assume for partial displacement? And, like, are the eligibility criteria, do you also require NIA certification levels for, like, there's a bunch of places where the NIA specs are specified. And so it's just raising a lot of questions for me to not questions, but where I'm like, oh, I would love to double check that. Does that align? And so I guess my request is for Efficiency Vermont to do that exercise and flag any. I will assume that the criteria do align unless you tell me otherwise, because those haven't been flagged by Opinion Dynamics as being different, but you guys are best positioned to tell us that.
Yeah, that's exactly what Ben Plotzker's review is looking like. But if you have specific questions to bring to next Thursday's tag that you want to double check, feel free. And I think Ben can speak on those.
Yeah, I think it mostly relates to the eligibility criteria piece, which I would assume would be a focus for you guys, like, you know, the specs for the replacement equipment, the measure equipment, and things like that. So if you're looking at that, that should capture it. But if I think of anything else, I'll flag it for you. Thank you. I'm glad you're doing that.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Matthew?
Not sure if we're sticking to any particular order here, but I think also for the delivered fuel measures to jump out of the installed TRM, I saw one of the added data points that was not included was whether the renewable identification or resource identification numbers should be provided along with the credit claims. So that's basically the federal way of tracking the attributes of that energy source. So it's essentially an analogy for carbon intensity as well. And I think since there's a requirement that the fuel be delivered in Vermont, the attributes should be owned when delivered, or that question has to be resolved to determine whether or not the person consuming the fuel is actually consuming the attribute, or if the attribute has been disassociated with the fuel that's delivered. So I guess I'd rephrase that as, should renewable attributes for fuels regulated under an attribute assigning program be required to be submitted alongside credit claims for volumes of such fuels consumed?
I'm going to ask others. Is that more a question that would go to the actual rulemaking when we see that as to how that's treated? Or, you know, is that something that's specifically referenced in the TRM?
I think it falls under the additional data, suggested additional data that they have for a number of measures. I'll find the exact wording.
Okay. So the renewable attributes for fuels that are regulated under other programs should be owned and provided when delivered, or should be that data should be provided when delivered to be able to track the ownership.
Right. So that would fall under program data tracking recommendations.
Okay, great. That's helpful.
Loose.
Yeah, I just have a question on, and perhaps someone, I just didn't see the definition on measure cost. What does that mean? Is that the installation cost? Is that just a cost they use? Can someone answer that for me?
That was a question that was asked earlier of OD, and they did respond. I don't remember exactly what the answer was.
It's in many cases, it's total cost of the measure, as I recall, which in certain cases will be the incremental cost of the measure. There was some debate about this earlier.
Right, it just seems very low in a lot of their numbers.
Oh, okay.
And then back to the insulation and weatherization comment, it seems like they might just use, what is it, 3,000 per use, and that's it. I don't think they worry too much about how big the building is or anything like that. It's not even per square foot of the size of the building. So just a comment there.
Okay, let me get that, grab that as a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much that would actually be used. Like I mean, that's sort of like, I think, included in the information in the TRM informationally. like I'm also very interested in making sure we agree with the differentiation between what's a full retrofit measure and what's a incremental measure, and making sure we understand which is which. But just as like a point of how this would all be used, I think the savings would be like if somebody's installing a measure and applying for credit, they would use the TRM to get the savings, but I would assume the tracking process would capture the actual cost of the measure, or are we assuming that so like maybe that's a question, is like the way this actually works with the credit reporting and retirement process, like do we get to know what the actual cost of the measure is, or are we relying on TRM assumptions?
I would imagine, well, since technically cost is not an issue that we're concerned with, it isn't, right? No, I don't imagine these measures, the cost of these measures is going to be tracked. You know, the third party goes out and delivers a measure. All that matters is the credits that they get for it, right? But I could be wrong about that. Matthew had his hand up though.
Yeah, on the same topic, I would just recommend Opinion Dynamics review measure cost estimates so that they're not putting forward low numbers based on recent inflation. I know, for example, NV5, I believe, used a 2.5% inflation catch-up yearly value to go from TRM costs that had been updated in 2018 to catch them up to 2026, or at least 2023, and then projected onto 2026. So I think there's some inflation that needs to be accounted for there. If we're going to put a number in the TRM for cost, it should be as close to reality as we can get it. And then Emily's point is interesting, that it's maybe not part of the credit claim process, but I think having actual reports from installers who are delivering measures saying, here's what the actual job cost would be a great input to the 3-year sustainability of credit generation check back requirement.
Agreed.
Okay, are we ready to move to the whiteboard and see if there are specific, not questions, but alternative options you'd like to see? I mean, I think all the things that you've added fall into that category.
Catherine, would you mind a pivot here? Because I do think that Brian's point about the emissions factors is correct, in that it's my failure not to have recognized this for the purposes of the agenda. I'd like to have that discussion. We've got folks from A&R here on the line to help us with it. So I'd like to see where it takes us, what we still have to touch on this. So if we can set aside some time now, I hope that would be okay with the group and with you, Catherine.
Just talk specifically about wood.
The issues that Brian is particularly interested in, anything else we might have missed in earlier discussions. Does that work, Brian?
Yeah, so Molly's here, so that's great. And we certainly can let her open the conversation about the emission factor for wood, but I imagine we will be discussing it for some other fuels as well.
Let's give ourselves at least, I don't know, 20 to 30 minutes right now for that, and then we can get back to the whiteboard. I appreciate that. Thank you, Catherine. And Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know I am here right now. I will have to jump off around 11.
Well, let's use your time now. And forgive me for not having been more attentive to it.
That's fine.
So it sounds like the floor is yours to raise
So,
issues.
yeah, I think, based on our last meeting, we brought up the issues. It really, I think, is a two-pronged approach of what we're seeing, and where we've just had some questions. And I think one is around sort of maybe this inconsistent of treatment of when you look at woody biomass compared to some of the other biofuels, in that the woody biomass used for wood heating fuels is a residual. And so when you looked at that with the other biofuels, you know, they weren't counting, say, like everything that was happening up to producing that biofuel, say like the manure management, what was going through the digester. But we are doing that for wood in this situation. So, you know, we've got our flags are raised around that inconsistent treatment. And then also the number being used, the 0.32, it's our understanding, you know, that I understand that was in the greenhouse gas inventory that was put out, but it was to be used as an example, not what that number should be. And now that's being carried over into the consultant's work. So an issue with how we're actually calculating that number as well.
So the 3.2 number is the carbon intensity of, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Carbon intensity
It's the
of-
global warming potential bio factor that that the agency and the included, as Molly said, as an example in the inventory, last year's version of the inventory, as a way to, as a way to acknowledge that there's a discussion regarding what the emissions are for wood, and like here's a methodology that exists for proposed by others that could be used to address it. It was not part of the official inventory, and yeah, what's happened is that that example number, which it's unclear whether or not it's representative of the feedstock that we would actually be getting for wood energy in Vermont, has been carried over as the ANR recommendation for GWP bio, and that's not really what we had intended. And in this year's inventory, that discussion is still in there, that concept, but that number is not in there anymore.
Okay. So there might need to be a further discussion. I don't think it's something that we would do right here, right now, but to relook at like what should that GWP bio number be? Because we feel pretty confident that the one being used now is not really representative of our wood fuels.
Would you ask that OD revisit that issue, and would you have references specifically for them to rely on? Or what would be, if you were going to present this as an alternative number, what would you propose to them?
Well, if you were going to treat it similarly to how the other biofuels are being treated, it's a residual, so it would be 0. But that's where it's like, there's that first hurdle before we even get to that of like, how are we going to look at all of these? So it's hard for me to answer that, because of that sort of two-pronged approach of how we're looking at it.
Got it.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Ken,
Well,
I see you have your.
Let me ask, well, Ken first, and then I'll have a question.
Yeah, just partly so that we're talking about apples and apples. Can you folks at ANR convert the GWP bio number into a grams per megajoule number for wood? And maybe it's different depending upon wood chips, wood pellets, cordwood. But I don't know what 0.32. I remember kind of what it represents as a number, but I don't know how it relates to the other numbers we're using, which are carbon intensity values based on grams per megajoule.
Yeah, and I shared with Brian where they do use, I believe, grams per megajoule, Ken, in a life cycle analysis that was done of all of our different woody biofuels. And you see it's very different numbers there.
Very different from?
Like the carbon intensity of what you're getting using the calculator that's being used by Opinion Dynamics.
Well, yeah, they're not using the calculator. I understand they're just picking up the number from last year's inventory. I don't think they did a separate analysis, and that calculator, I think it's a great tool, but it does, my understanding is that it does look at wood energy at the stand level and not at the landscape level.
And in terms of wood pellets, I don't think they used that. I think they used, and I may have this wrong, but the whole, is it Nature Conservancy? And because one of the terms that stands out for me is purpose-grown forests, where we know down in the Southeast, they have stands of trees that are for the sole purpose. You grow the trees, you cut the trees, you turn them into wood pellets. And I believe their calculation for wood pellets was based on that, which doesn't include any mill wastes, or and you know, look at our own Clarendon plant, the white pine there, whether that would be called residual, that's a great topic, but I don't think that they used the calculator for that number. They may have for wood chips and cordwood. So maybe this is a question to them. But it was my understanding that that's where the pellet number came on, which is very large.
Ken, am I right that that was a question that was presented to them at our last tag meeting? So they should have that, right?
I forget.
They were asked how they came up with that, but
Okay.
Yeah, we presented that list, you know, to them. That question was a part of our list.
okay. Make sure that they've got it. Yeah, Matthew?
Is there maybe a set of sources that A&R could provide to them? It almost sounds like we're leaning towards a per feedstock and per pathway emission factor for wood, depending on how it's sourced and produced. I'm not sure if like the harvest report would be one of those inputs, but
Yeah, we do. And that's where, yes, and we do have some studies that have done of a life cycle analysis of our different wood fuels that we could share.
Well, the question I have for you, Molly and Brian, is are you in effect saying that, or are we in effect seeing that we need to wait for A&R to come to some conclusion on this question before we have proper inputs for the TRM?
Well, and I'll let Brian talk. Maybe I'm not correct in this, but like my understanding of how we look at it is not on the per tree basis, like what Brian was saying. We look at it on a landscape level. And so when you do that, you are basically in line with the IPCC standards, which gives a very different, like I said, unless you've got, you know, land use change or conversion, it becomes a net zero. And it's captured there. That's my understanding of it when you're looking at it at a landscape level. Brian, am I?
You're correct. That's how that works. And I think where in the context of the clean heat standard and the targets that we're trying to achieve, that's where, you know, it becomes complicated.
Right, because we feel like, and that's where Brian and I have had other conversations, and it's like, okay, well, but there's, you know, well, how do you measure, you know, there's got to be some measurement there. If for the clean heat standard, because this doesn't fit neatly into what the clean heat standard is really trying to do potentially. But
Well,
yeah.
Wally, I think you were on just a little bit after the meeting started, and Rick, I'm going to try and say what you said. Basically, we're going to have this conversation, and then there's going to be assignments to particular people, and I saw my name prominently displayed on the whiteboard with wood energy. So we're happy to take more questions on this, but I think the long and the short of it is that this is an assignment that's going to be made to A&R. to come back to the TAG with a recommendation for, the treatment of wood energy, both, as, in the three categories that it's classified in the emissions factors tables for pellets, for chips, and for cordwood. So I'm not trying to end this discussion prematurely, but, I don't think we're going to give any answers to everybody today.
I don't think we have answers. One thing I think that's needed though for that group is, and obviously for other groups that are bringing up questions around the biofuels, is then we do need to make sure it's consistent treatment. So how are we going to look at it? Because then we need to be able to do that.
All right, you do have a couple hands, I'm assuming still on this topic. Luce and then Emily.
Right, I was just rereading the September 9th report we got from OD about, they were using the 0.32 for regrowth, is what they say in their paragraph here, right? Wood fuels to account for the regrowth period, but the pellets themselves are from lumber wood, lumber mill residues, and lumber mill waste. So,
Which that terminology was also a question for us, and within the forest economy program, we don't use the term lumber wood, so I'm not sure what they're
What that
talking
is.
about there.
okay. So maybe we just, this was one we got a couple of weeks ago, so
Yeah,
wanted to point out, maybe this needs to be rewritten.
I think so, and certainly we should be using terminology that's used within the industry around that, because I don't think most people would know what that is really truly referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah, sorry to be off camera for a minute. I guess as someone who is absolutely not an expert in wood fuels of any sort, I'm struggling to reconcile kind of ANR's perspective with the many public comments we've received on this topic, and would value, like, if it's appropriate, I would love to, I see we have some members of the public that might be able to convey their comments more effectively than I could. I wondered if we could have some, like, a response from ANR. Like, I'm seeing people disagreeing with the characterization of it being, all waste product, for example. And so I agree that additional work will be done and that ANR will definitely need to play a lead role in that, but I'm not sure if we're doing full justice to the breadth of the kind of information that is coming into the TAG about this topic if we only assign it to ANR and don't have, I'm just struggling to reconcile all the different perspectives on this issue.
Well, Emily might, that's a fair point. We certainly, as I said, we're going to have issues that we don't agree on. So we're going to want to have text of the alternatives. So, A&Rs will be one perspective. If you've got another one with,
Well, I guess I am not sure I do. Like, I don't understand this issue well enough, and that's partly why I'm asking this question, because I would love to hear, like, Laura, for example, ask ANR a direct question and then have ANR respond to that question, so I could understand, like, to help inform my own perspective on this issue, which is still developing. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, at this point, I'm just hearing like two very different perspectives and I don't know what to think of them.
Well, I certainly encourage you, as anyone can, to have offline discussions on these issues to become better informed. Absolutely. Anything further?
So you're
I
saying
guess one,
not appropriate to take a few public comments at this point is what
No, I'm not. We're not taking public comment at this point.
I guess one thing I'm wondering, Rick, and maybe Brian, what you'll just reach out to us about this, is like just the timeline, and is there a process, when you've got these subgroups sort of doing this work, like what that sort of looks like. So I can know. Yeah, I saw the look.
Yeah.
We're timeline.
Yeah.
We'll take as much time as we need, but we really are being pressed by the PUC to give them our perspectives on these issues as soon as possible. I'd love to be able to, you know, send them whatever it is we agree on or don't agree on within the next month.
Well, in terms of the subgroup's responsibility, the subgroup is informing the tag about the issues that they need to discuss. So if we can have, say, a short write-up of the wood fuel issue, even if you don't have a definitive answer or option, to at least flag what you see as the inconsistency, so that we could take it up at our full group meeting next week. So that's what we had hoped to do, you know, in our call today, is try to flag those issues that need to be taken up by the full group for consideration of alternative options.
Yeah, and we'll start that process next week. We don't expect to have everything, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time. So,
And the
yeah.
prioritization that we were going to do today was hopefully going to help us decide what to start on. Ken.
Yeah, I do want to, I'll say partly respond to Emily. Well, I'm also not an expert. I certainly do understand an argument that I think is different than what Molly suggested with regards to consistency in biofuels. And it largely is an issue of time. So I'll frame it this way. If we had a world where we did not use wood for energy purposes in Vermont, certainly, and if we flipped that switch today, there would be I'll call it a decrease or an increase, a change in the carbon economy. In other words, either because trees are not the harvest practice is altered so that lower economic value trees are not cut down, or they are not removed from the woods, they are left on the ground, in which case their carbon emissions are much delayed than where they're taken, either put into a chip or turned into cordwood or turned into wood pellets. So part of this issue is about timing, and it's not just regrowth, which has to do with harvesting. When you harvest in a way that takes lower economic value trees, what does that mean for the overall carbon uptake for the forest, which is a topic, but also in the short term that maybe it's called counterfactual, I don't know, but it's the fate of the carbon when it's not being used for energy. And so I think, Molly, and I ask you to kind of weigh in on this, it would be a different carbon calculation if we stopped using forest products for energy today. But like I say, it gets to this sort of the discount rate for today's emissions versus future emissions, both in terms of regrowth and in terms of the fate of a lower economic value forest product that's not put into the energy stream today, its ultimate carbon release. So that's why taking it to zero is, I'll say, unsatisfactory to a lot of folks. It may be if you put a zero discount rate and you looked at a 100-year time frame, okay, but I don't think we are looking at a zero discount rate because we recognize that carbon emissions today have a greater impact than carbon emissions 100 years from now. So I'm just trying to frame why folks won't just automatically accept, oh, carbon is net zero. So to the extent I'm wrong, let me know, but I say, I know that some of the folks on the phone would want to weigh in, and I just wanted to at least attempt to represent some of that argument.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else on this point? Matthew.
Not exactly on this point, but a related note. I think at the last meeting, we talked about the incremental land use change impacts for renewable fuels. And Floyd, I don't remember if it was you who said that, 10 years ago, it was estimated to be significantly higher than what it's estimated at today. But I think Opinion Dynamics didn't include that contribution to the carbon intensity of various renewable fuels. And I believe for corn, for example, corn ethanol, it's something like 9.9 grams per megajoule compared to the emissions factor that we have for number 2 fuel oil, if that's 100 or under 100, a 10% contribution for the emissions value does seem like it's an appropriate metric for inclusion. If we're trying to do, you know, the agreed equivalent life cycle analysis, I'm not sure if there are rebuttals against that point, but I just wanted to mention that it seemed like they should be including that incremental land use change. Granted, Vermont is very small, but if you displace a food crop growth in the US, there's a global calorie market. So it may be small, but it seems like it's certainly not zero.
I just to follow up and make sure I understand that point, Matthew. I think you're bringing up, you know, and I was one of the people that made this suggestion that incremental land use change, or that land use change should be considered for liquid biofuels. But I think this also relates to the consistency issue that Molly mentioned, which is how land use changes are treated for wood versus other fuels. And right now the land use changes are being excluded for the liquid biofuels, but really all, like most of the wood impact is in the land use change category. So if we want to include it for wood, so I think that to me argues for consistently including it for everything. But is that sort of, am I characterizing that or understanding that issue somewhat correctly?
I think so.
Well, yeah, I think so. And so then if we're going to do that, well, then there's, yeah, a lot more work to be done to look at that full life cycle analysis in that time frame.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, the way that, fortunately or unfortunately,
Yeah.
the Vermont Clean Heat Standard law is written, we are supposed to look at the full life cycle impact. So, you know, even if it's outside of the thermal sector. So, I mean, I think I'm in agreement with both of you on sort of that approach, but I just wanted, I guess, to underscore your point about consistency and to not send ANR off to do a huge exercise without some, like, a little bit of guidance about how we, I mean, I guess our guidance would be just do it both ways and give us all the information so that we can like.
Well, yeah, that is what I was sort of asking there, you know, like if Brian's going to pull together a group and we're going to try and put something together, like what do we need to, what are our guidelines, you know, because we'd want to, and that should be for everything so that it's that consistency.
I'll just jump in before Floyd. I think you've answered I hope you've answered your own question there. Consistency, what the alternatives look like, what we're faced with, and what they mean. But yeah, I'm struggling with the issue clearly. So I need, as full a presentation of the issues and, what they mean for the clean heat standard would be great. Floyd.
So a couple of points, just to respond to Matthew's questions, which I think are good. One is, I think we need to keep in mind I think there's a little bit of conflation between direct land use change and indirect land use change, right? So direct land use change is when, I as a farmer till my farm and I apply fertilizer and, do all the things it takes to grow my crops and turn it into whatever products. That has direct emissions, and those are accounted for already in the life cycle assessments that put out by the GREET folks, okay? When we're talking about ILUC, you're talking about an indirect land use change that is theoretical, highly uncertain, lots of controversy. And the key point here is, I do want to remind folks that, Section 8127 of Act 18 requires that both the credits and the emission schedules be based on life cycle assessments that are verifiable. And by definition, an indirect land use change cannot be verified because it is inferred from computable general equilibrium models. So those are kind of best guesses at how the world would respond to a policy or some other external force. So if the statute calls for, strict verifiability of a life cycle figure, carbon intensity part of the whole life cycle carbon intensity, then ILUC fails that test on its face. You cannot measure it directly. You can try to take a best guess. You can certainly verify if somebody estimated it, but you can't verify the estimate itself. So I do want to make sure that people are aware that this is a number that exists, and it's, it depends on what model you use, who's doing the modeling, their expertise in interpreting the results, the assumptions, the inputs, and the data sets, all of which can be different from one model to another. And that just speaks to the difficulty in having Vermont come up with, an ILUC figure. And that ILUC figure does need to be developed if you're going to go down that path for Vermont. You cannot apply a California ILUC figure for a 3.6 billion gallon distillate market to a 100 or 150 million gallon distillate market in Vermont and assume that you're going to have similar effects somewhere down in Indonesia or Malaysia or Brazil. I mean, that's just, that's just illogical. So is there potentially a theoretical ILUC that could be, calculated or estimated for the clean heat standard? I can't rule it out. I think it would be highly impractical for Vermont to try that. And, even if you could, it would be basically noise relative to, all the other carbon intensities that you can directly measure and verify as required by statute.
Lloyd, can I just ask, you gave a great example of direct land use change. Can you give it a similar example of indirect land use change?
So an indirect land use change is, something, the theory goes that if I, as a farmer in the Midwest, grow soybeans, for example, and, that has certain uses for it, including the oils that you squeeze out. And remember, I said 80% of the bean is protein and only 20% is oil, and only a fraction of that 20% goes to fuel production. If I then take, more of that oil and take it away from its current uses and put it into fuel, the theory goes that creates a vacuum in the global market for lipids, and somewhere else in the world, someone's going to clear a forest or other carbon, carbon productive ag land or land, clear that out, and then use that to grow, soybeans or palm or some other fat generating product. And then that would then replace the soybean oil that was used. That's not how the world has operated in reality. In reality, what American farmers have done is significantly ramped up the efficiency and the yield from each acre of the land that they currently use. And they're not expanding the land in the U.S. They're basically getting better and better at growing soybean and corn and other products on that land. So each year you're getting increases in yield through efficiency improvements, and selective breeding of the seeds, other sort of improvements in the farming techniques, and you're getting this increasing in yield. So the theory is one thing. What we're seeing in reality is another thing completely.
So Rick, where do you want to go from here? We've kind of moved wood to delivered fuels questions.
I wanted to, in the 15 minutes that we've still allocated for this, I just want to identify any other emissions factors related questions before we go back to the whiteboard. Brian.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's wrong, but the emission factors that OD presented for biodiesel and for renewable diesel, the lowest ones are for corn, and the second lowest is from used cooking oil. And usually waste-based feedstocks have lower carbon intensities, and I couldn't puzzle out how it is they came to that conclusion. So I'd like to understand that better. And
Would you say it again, just so I can get the notes proper?
the carbon intensities for biodiesel and renewable diesel from corn as a feedstock are the lowest in that batch. And I'm used to seeing the waste-based feedstocks, and the example that's in the table is used cooking oil, as always being the lowest.
Okay, got it.
So I just want to understand how they got to that.
Thank you.
Can I give the quick answer? I learned this just from this exercise, and that is the corn oil used is not edible corn oil. It is truly a waste in the and actually in the ethanol process. So its alternate use does not lead anyway. It is very much a waste product, and it largely is from ethanol production.
Okay, we can still ask and see what they say.
Emily?
Just a clarifying question for Rick. If we identified a number of questions at the last full tag meeting on carbon intensity of fuels, you're not asking for us to repeat that now, right? This is just any new questions that have emerged on top of those. Okay, just wanted to double check.
Because OD has gotten those questions.
In that batch of questions, did we include a request for the actual inputs and calculation they used in GREET? Because I think that might get to a bunch of the answers to questions we've asked now.
I believe we did, but we can ask again.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add to that, I mean, even screenshots of the GREET spreadsheet that shows the inputs and the assumptions and the outputs, I think that would be helpful.
Great, thank you. I'm writing as fast as I can.
And I'm typing, which is probably faster.
Oh, I bet, yeah. Anything else then?
Yeah, I just need to I hear what Ken said, but if that's true, and what Floyd's saying is true, that the soybean oil is also a waste product, then why isn't that one lower? So I'm just trying to get my head around. It's like, are all of these feedstocks for biofuels all waste based?
Soil oil is edible.
That can be.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, Brian, I think inedible corn oil, as treated in GREET within the system boundary that's chosen under GREET, gets an additional co-product credit because it displaces other oils that are can then be used. So it's got that waste product sort of treatment, but it gets an additional credit for being a co-product of that production of ethanol. And it's all GREET to me, but yeah, that's my understanding of the kind of the differences between it. But we can delve a little bit more into that.
You've been waiting a lot of meetings, Floyd, to be able to spring that line on us.
I have. Months.
And you get points with me for any reference, however elusive, to Shakespeare. Emily?
Just wanted to flag a follow-up request, I guess, to ANR, just to the extent they are collecting further information and recommendations to provide, like, make sure that's broken down for different wood fuels. in Vermont. Thank you.
And Floyd, you had another question? Nope. So I don't want to note that Casey has joined us and he may have some questions about installed. And so Casey, we've already kind of covered outstanding questions on installed measures, which I know is our interest to you. So wanted to,
I'll make myself. I'll try and catch up.
okay.
I need to exactly start the show.
Matthew.
Well, this might be a nice segue on emission factors for electricity. I did note that there's a value in the spreadsheet they provided for electricity called system average emission rate. That is just a summation of the individual emissions factors for each generation source. I don't think that's a real metric. I'm not sure if it's used for anything, but I don't know if they intended to do a weighted average for this system average emissions rate for electricity. But what's currently in the spreadsheet, it doesn't appear appropriate. And then in addition to that, related to the transmission and distribution line loss adder, I believe they have a value of 4% as an additional loss to apply to installed electric measures. I'm not sure where 4% comes from, but I believe the AESC value is something like 9% with a peak value of 18%. I may not have those numbers exactly right, but they're not 4%. So if they have a basis for that number, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, we had an earlier question about how that adder is used, in fact, at all.
Matthew, can you repeat the first point you made? I didn't, about the system average versus what was, I'm not sure I followed it. Oh, you're muted.
There's a row in the emissions table that they provided for electricity called system average emission rate. And the formula in that row is just a summation of various generation types, solar, wind, natural gas. And that's, I'm guessing it's just a placeholder and, it's draft, but just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be used anywhere as it currently is calculated.
I'll take a look at it. Yeah, and we'll send that question. Great.
So it could just be the assumptions that are behind their actual calculation, but we don't know.
Right. Okay. Okay. If nothing else on emission factors, let us return to the whiteboard. And thank you, Molly, if you're still here, and Brian, and everyone. Thank you. That was, I think, a helpful discussion.
I am still here, and yeah, thanks. And I'll touch base with Brian after, and hopefully we can help. Guys have a big task.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
So we did, in fact, capture some of that wood biomass, pre-populate this with some of the questions that were raised. One was about how emission factors for advanced wood heating systems are determined. These were in your earlier questions. But if incorrect, that could be an issue that would become part of an alternative proposal, and whether it should be treated as waste wood or purpose-grown crops as a feedstock material for pellets and wood chips, etc. So we had that in there. I guess I'm still going to open it up to see if there are other very clear alternatives you want to be sure that get addressed in a memo to the tag. We have lots of questions to OD as a separate matter and suggestions that certain measures be added. So setting those aside, are there specific things about their approach that you found, particularly under, let's go to the installed measures first, that you would like to take issue with? Under any of these categories.
And we'll be having this discussion again with the full tag, so you've got a little more time to prepare, but yes, anything you've got in mind now would be great. And if not,
most of the questions I had, I already conveyed to Emily Roscoe. It had to do with consistency of assumptions. The one other thing that's kind of on my mind is I guess I'm still confused about how we are dealing with codes and standards in the clean heat standard overall. So just taking heat pump water heaters, like residential heat pump water heaters, as an example that I happen to be familiar with. There's a new federal standard taking effect in 2029 that's likely to shift most of the electric water heater market to heat pump water heaters. So that then becomes the baseline. And I guess it's unclear to me whether we care about that. Like, can you only get clean heat credits for things that are above the baseline? I think so in other areas. Like, I think we've all agreed that if there was a law that required collection of methane from farms, that you wouldn't then also be able to count that toward the clean heat standards. So I don't know, I'm just a little bit confused about just the treatment of codes and standards in the law, but then at the same time, we know there are benefits from codes and standards shifts that will accrue towards meeting Vermont's reductions in the thermal sector under its greenhouse gas inventory. Yeah, I think it's clear sort of what I'm confused about, so I'll stop there. But
well, I'll take a stab at that just and see if I get it all wrong for people to correct me on. It would seem to me that the example you used would have the effect of ensuring that at that time that heat pumps meet a certain, they behave in a certain way, they meet a certain efficiency standard. Well, at that point, the tag and, I think would review what this means and would that change, and it could change, the deemed savings numbers for heat pumps from that time on. Presumably, again, you're still measuring the heat pump against the fossil fuel replacement. Now, if we have, in this case, more efficient heat pumps, there would be either more efficient or whatever that may or may not have an immediate or direct implication for their carbon. Well, it would with respect to the electricity emissions they produce. So you would expect some amount of additional carbon savings as a consequence. Does that make sense?
it did until the very end. So I think
let me say it again then. Okay, the heat pump avoids your fossil fuel boiler, right?
Yeah,
okay.
you still
So
get
those emissions stay the same. Now the question is, if it's more efficient, it's using less electricity, and therefore the net emissions that it reduces would go up slightly for whatever electricity grid savings, emission savings there are from that efficiency.
You're saying you wouldn't get as much electricity reduction benefit in the clean.
No, I'm saying you get more.
Yeah, but should you be able to count it if that's the code?
Well,
or does it adjust to that new baseline? And so you don't really get the electricity savings. You can't count that anymore because that's the baseline. The standard becomes the new baseline, and then you basically only get the fuel savings.
Sounds like a good question for OD to respond to. So,
well, the way I see it, I see it that you actually get those savings. It's a more
right. Yeah. So I guess that's my question, because seems potentially inconsistent with some aspects of, yeah, I guess there's just some inconsistencies with how this could work in the clean heat standard, and I'm just trying to shift to that measure, which I don't have right in front of me, but the way the codes and standards sections are very vague. Like it just will say something. I'll try to see if I can find it really quickly to be able to get to it, but it just says like the standard is the DOE standard, but it doesn't actually say like, and we've applied it in this way. Like it means that, you know, in 2029 we reduce the increment of savings, or we don't. Like it just lists an applicable standard.
Okay, well, let's ask the question, but in my example, it would increase the savings. That's the thing. It would actually increase the savings because you'd have fewer grid emissions. Nothing else changes, right? The heat pump avoids the boiler. Now the question is, how much emissions does the operation of the heat pump create? That number should go down because it's a more efficient heat pump, and therefore the net is larger starting in 2029. Now, the question then I would ask of OD, and this would be a question for, you know, I suppose administration of the CHS altogether, is it right to assume that all heat pumps from that time forward meet the federal standards? Brian.
Michelle, I saw your hand up first and then you put it down and you're back up. Did you want to go first?
Yeah, you might have the same thing. I was trying to, thank you, Brian, interject. Perhaps, Emily, you bring up a good question about codes and standards, and Rick, you bring up a good perspective about looking at the specific metrics of the clean heat standard. Emily, am I hearing your question in that basically you want to know if the same rules about shifting baselines that apply to efficiency programs, do they have an impact here, or are we only looking at the absolute figures like Rick is pointing out?
Yeah, I guess that is a good way of summarizing my fundamental question. And it's not totally clear to me from the words in these sections of the TRM which approach the opinion dynamics is using.
I think it's a fair question for the group to understand. So thanks for the time. Back to you, Brian.
Sure. So in the interest of us all coming together, I think Emily and Rick are both correct. I think Rick is correct in that every time you replace a fossil fuel burning unit at any time with a heat pump, you're going to capture some emission reductions. But Emily, you're correct in that the overall credit budget that we, in order to be able to achieve, reductions by, well, 2030 is not really going to be in play for a 2029 federal standard, but, on the 2050 trajectory, it's like the budget would need to be adjusted to be able to account for now in this new updated baseline, if that's the federal standard, here's what emissions from heating in the RCI sector are going to be just for because of the existence of like a federal or potentially a state appliance standard. And then here's, how we need to adjust the credit budget to be able to achieve what the additional emissions are, reductions that we need to be in order to be able to meet a 2050 target or some interim trajectory.
Right. I mean, I think if we did it Rick's way, then we're paying via clean heat credits for things that would have happened anyway to some extent.
I agree that, I mean, Brian's making the right point there. I was not thinking about adjustments to the budget. Assuming no adjustments to the budget, I'll maintain my position. But the moment you adjust the budget, yeah, you're now, that's right. I get it. Thank you, Brian.
Right. You have to adjust the budget because now you're trying to achieve emissions reductions with this program that are different than they are before you have a baseline that builds in reductions.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying, this has been my question all along that I've tried to flag in some of the like program coordination questions too, is that there's like a lot of other things happening in the market. And I guess the way that I had understood this working from RAP is that the clean heat standard is an umbrella where all of those things contribute and can get clean heat credits, but I don't know. That just is confusing to me in practice because it makes more sense to me that you would sort of reduce the amount you need to achieve through the like incremental clean heat credits by whatever else is happening through like efficiency Vermont tier 3 codes and standards. Like it just means there's less work to do through just the clean heat credit.
Right. And when you say RAP, I'd be broader about that. The people who, were behind this idea, always had in mind what Brian has just said, that you adjust for changes, obviously in the budget and so yes, nothing is, the starting point isn't static, I guess, is in that case. The budget changes and you account for that.
So I think the question still stands for OD.
Well, ask him. Yeah, sure.
So I've been just adding a couple of things that were raised in our earlier conversation as potential issues under eligibility criteria, as you noted, Emily. If they're not consistent with Efficiency Vermont and WAP criteria, they we need to have some sort of alignment there, and measure costs should be updated to reflect actual inflation. I think was Matthew's point. So there's a couple of things that I think we can go back, and if there's anything else you think needs to be added here from our earlier discussion. I think codes and standards is more of a question. How is it going to be handled as opposed to how should it be handled? But looking for additional how should OD's approach be perhaps reconsidered. Anything else that's missing? The next step was for us just to sort of prioritize the issues you think that the tag needs to take on at our next meeting first. Again, not that it excludes any of these issues. I'm going to make the assumption here that OD will be at the meeting and they will address some of the questions for the installed measures that we've talked about today. So beyond that, would it be helpful for us just to do a sort of a straw vote on what you think are the most important issues for us to devote attention to at the next meeting? Because there is a voting mechanism here and I can activate that if you think it's helpful. Emily Levin and then Emily Roscoe.
All right, I'm just trying to find the list of clean heat measures in the legislation, which I need to just memorize, I guess, and commit to memory, but okay, here it is. So yeah, I guess I was just reflecting back on Ken's comment from earlier in the meeting about wood stoves, and then that made me realize that the list of eligible measures in the law just says advanced wood heating. So I guess I'm a little bit surprised to see just like wood stoves on the list of measures, which to me are not a form of advanced wood heating. Have we already had that conversation as a tag? Like, are we positive that that's supposed to be included as a measure? I'm just, I guess same question for pellet stoves. I guess the way I think of that measure, it's like a central pellet system was sort of what I was picturing. But then now that I look at the measure list, we've got measures for pellet and cordwood stoves. Um, yeah,
So I think I might have lost your question in the midst of that. So your question is, are advanced pellet stoves what they're referring to when they refer to wood stoves?
no, our stove, like, should stoves be a clean heat measure? I guess this is a question for my tag members. Like, have we discussed this issue and put it to bed already? Is everyone else like very clear that that's supposed to be an eligible clean heat measure?
I'll
A
just quickly
standard-
add, there is an energy codes and standards paragraph within those measures. And it basically says there's a baseline condition from US new source performance standards requirements set by the EPA. So maybe that's the criteria that delineates your run-of-the-mill stove from like the 70s to a stove today that happens to meet the new source performance standards.
Yeah, I guess if I have many follow-ups to that, just because I work for an organization that cares a lot about air quality and has resulted in an inspector general report saying that the entire EPA certification program for stoves is fundamentally flawed. So like, I'm not convinced of that being sufficient, but I guess before I go there, I want to understand, like, is this consistent with does everyone else agree that the intention here was to make just like a regular cordwood stove an eligible measure, or even a pellet stove?
Turn to Emily Roscoe first and then Ken.
My comment's separate, so I'll hand it off to Ken.
Yeah, just quickly, we did talk about it a little bit, but we never resolved it. There are definitions of advanced wood heat that include EPA certified stoves, but yeah, we as a tag certainly never weighed in on that definition, and it is one that the PUC is going to have to resolve as to what is the definition of advanced wood heat.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't like miss the meeting where that we had that discussion and it was resolved, because I have a lot of thoughts on inclusion of various types of stoves in this and would welcome having a fuller discussion of the tag around the definition of an advanced wood heat measure. So I just wanted to flag that, because right now it's just included in the TRM as though like we all understand it to be a measure, and I don't know that that's the case.
I suspect they included it so that the tag and the PUC could have this discussion.
So I'm putting that as another issue for discussion and potential disagreement or alternative options.
Yet another thing we can disagree about, Catherine.
Emily Roscoe?
I was just gonna say that we hadn't had enough opportunity before the last tag to fully review, in my opinion, the installed measure TRM. I think it was released a couple days before, so I feel like it'd be helpful to have some sort of Q&A time with Opinion Dynamics in the next tag on this portion of the TRM, since it's quite large.
Oh yeah, we certainly want that. Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're assuming we're going to get them next week, but we'll find out. We got to hear back.
Any other issues you'd like? Well, I guess to my question, we will spend a fair amount of time on the information about installed measures and any questions that the tag has on installed measures as a priority for the next meeting. And then this subgroup has the opportunity to come forward with specific suggestions for how the tag would approach some of these open questions, open issues. Do you want, we would love somebody to, Brian has already volunteered, thankfully, to take on, some of the work that would need to be done to just lay out what the options are for wood biomass. And we'd like to, Ken, you, for instance, have said you've done some work on comparing NV5 and OD's emission factor differences. I'm not sure if that's I think that's more of a question that we've posed to OD, and I don't know that it needs to have a written statement before we get our answers back from them, but
So I guess couple thoughts and follow-up questions. Some of these, like the delivered fuel carbon intensity issues, like on carbon intensity of biofuels, we've sent that to ANR for future work. Delivered fuel carbon intensity issues, both the indirect land use change and the counterfactual approach, I feel like we've had a pretty robust conversation in the tag, and so the task is maybe like summarizing the options and just kind of capturing what's been discussed already. This definition of advanced wood heating thing, I just wanted to clarify. I don't know that we want to just send that to ANR. I think that's a separate issue that we really haven't had a full discussion at the tag yet, so that probably merits more discussion. So I guess I would try to differentiate what are outstanding questions to OD, what are things we've discussed that just need to be written up, what are things that we need to have like additional discussion and perspective shared among tag members, and try to bucket things that way.
yeah, that's helpful. So you're sort of saying we've had enough discussion on some of these that we just need them sort of written up as what the alternative positions are. And others that we haven't really had a full discussion on, like advanced wood fuel definition. So can do that. So why don't we take other volunteers that would be willing to help with the write-ups of the different positions on some of the things we have had full discussion on, and then we can set those aside.
Yeah, another one in that category, I think, well, I don't know that we've had a lot of discussion, but I think the issue is fairly straightforward to write up, but this, you have it next to my name, step down in biofuels carbon intensities over time. This isn't something, Opinion Dynamics made it clear that they didn't intend to take a position on this, but we're just presenting data. I think there's two pretty clear options. It either steps down in 2030 and 2050, or there's like an annual straight line decline. I could probably take on writing up those options, but I guess I would ask if others feel like we've already had sufficient discussion of that, or if we should talk. Yeah.
A write-up would be helpful, even on the issues that we haven't had a full discussion on, such as advanced wood heat. Having a write-up from somebody as a point of departure for the discussion would be helpful. In the case of the step down, I think, a few words on that would be great, because I think the tag will want to say at some point what we think ought to happen with that. Although I will say on that particular issue, since it's really one that has a few years, well, I suppose it does affect treatment after 2030, does affect the out years of some installed measures, but yeah, I think we're going to want to say something about that one way or the other, how that should be treated.
Yeah. So I can take that one on, having looked at that in some detail, if that's helpful. But are we doing these write-ups for the meeting next week, or for?
Well, as soon as possible, whenever we haven't done the agenda yet, but yes, obviously if you could do a paragraph before next week, that'd be great, but we got to sit down and really, figure out what the agenda is going to look like.
Can I ask a question? So Emily, can you clarify, are you suggesting rather than a linear decrease in the emissions schedule, the target schedule, that those be like stepwise? Or I wasn't quite clear. I wasn't sure I was following you. Or are you talking about the CI scores of the pathways over time? Is your question about that, or the schedule itself?
The CI pathways, the 60% in 2030 and is it 20%, 2050? Like if it's just it's 60% until 2050 and it drops down to 20, or if it's a straight line decrease from 60 to 20 over that time period. When that issue was briefly discussed by the pacing subgroup, and in reaction to, I think what was it, like a PUC or DPS proposal, and we agreed it should step down from 80 to 60 between 2025 and 2030, which is what they had proposed, just because there's so much going on in these initial years that we didn't feel like layering on a gradual decrease made sense. But we refrained from taking a position about what should happen after 2030. And so we could potentially revisit that as a tag. Does that answer?
Yeah, so you're suggesting that the emissions rate targets or the schedule should be stepwise. It goes at one level for a number of years until it changes, and then it drops down to the next level.
I'm definitely not suggesting that. In fact, I lean towards the opposite, that it should be a gradual decrease.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't clear.
Yeah, some of what, just some of the information that the way it was presented by Opinion Dynamics in their spreadsheets made it seem like we had settled on having it be at 60 and then dropping to 20. And so that was sort of a clarification that they weren't intending to like propose that or assume that. It just was, anyway. All I would be doing is writing up a couple of options for the tag to discuss further. I'm not trying to take a position on it at this moment, although I think have an inclination of my own.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks for volunteering for that, Emily. That would be helpful. Other volunteers. Matthew, you brought up the issue of the inflation. Is that more of a question, or are you sure that they have not made the adjustment for inflation and therefore this would be a proposal?
It's a question, but based on some of the values in the TRM, it appears to me like it hasn't been accounted for. So the question of whether or not and how they intend to adjust those values to reflect inflation at the beginning of the program start.
Okay, so it's not really we need more information before we can take a position one way or the other. They may have done it correctly. Got it. In terms of the counterfactual approach, do we have a volunteer for somebody that would be willing to write up the two alternative discussions we've had around that, alternative approaches we've had discussed around that? You smile, Rick, because you think you're going to get stuck with it, right?
I'm smiling because I can imagine no one wants to take on that task. Oh boy.
I mean, Rick has ended up most of this.
I am willing to write up this one. I do feel like I have a fairly strong position, so I understand my perspective, which is that I don't support incorporating counterfactual savings, and I do support incorporating.
We're not
but what I'm saying is, like, I would feel comfortable writing up that half of it if someone else wanted to take it and writing up the other half, which I just don't understand the other side's arguments well enough to convey them. So I don't know if someone wants to do the whole thing, I'm totally fine with that. I'm just offering to help with parts of this.
Emily, I'm happy to write the other half of that or take a stab at writing the whole thing and letting you edit it.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, if you're willing to take a stab at writing the whole thing and letting me edit it, Sam, that would be great.
Well, and you know, ultimately we'll all edit it. So yes.
Yeah.
Sam, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And we may disagree, but we can still collaborate on this.
Look, my experience is that when you have something written in front of you, it really does help clarify the issues, clarify the points of contention, and sometimes creates a path a pathway for resolution. We'll see, but that would be great.
How many puns can we use in this one meeting?
Floyd, can we draft you into addressing the land use change, since you seem to have a pretty good grasp of the two sides of the issue?
I would be perfectly happy to do that.
Perfectly happy. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, there are times when I'm imperfectly happy because I'm forced to be happy, but yeah.
Oh,
I'm wondering on the advanced wood heat, not to volunteer you, Ken, but kind of to volunteer you. Do you understand that well enough to put some thoughts together?
I'm going to jump in
Yes.
before Ken answers. He's going on vacation tomorrow.
Oh,
Yeah, but what do you do when you fly in an airplane? Don't you draft pithy paragraphs about clean energy?
Well, if you can do,
honestly, the last time I flew across the country, I wrote my town's ESTBG application on the plane. So yes,
Hey.
that's the type of thing I would do.
You know, I am imperfectly happy to do that.
great, Ken.
All right, got your name.
Thank you.
And in terms of the public health impacts, that's a big one. I know, Rick, you have reached out to Jared. Is there something you can report on his?
No, I've reached out to him, but he and I have not chatted yet, so I will talk to him.
So it would not necessarily be Jared, but presumably somebody, you know, some collection of people within
Right.
Department of Public Health, Department of Health that could help him.
Yeah, I'll talk to him. He's obviously, this is his area of interest. And I just haven't, he and I, said we'd talk, but we haven't talked yet. So I will.
I can help with that one too, possibly a little bit depending on the timing.
Okay.
I just also wanted to flag a nexus between that and the advanced wood heating measure definition, just because that is one of the main issues with stoves is the air
Sure.
pollution.
Yep. Let me just get this. Okay.
Another one, I have your name by it, Ken, but the tracking recommendations. I'm wondering, Emily Roscoe, would you be willing and able to sort of address whether or not, because looks like you're going to be looking at that anyway, whether or not there is consistency between EVT and some of the program data being required in the TRM, the OD's TRM?
Yep, I'll have something written up. My plan right now, if that makes sense, is to kind of have a bulleted list of what is currently being tracked. Not the actual data, but like the headers, the types of information being tracked. And I'm not sure if we can do a full comprehensive analysis of what alignment is, but we'll try and take a look at that as best we can. And I'll have a bulleted list to share before Thursday.
Will that also include comparison with the lifetime of the measures?
Can you clarify? I was looking at the program tracking recommendations. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Well, I was just wondering, it's part of your your complete review of all the TRM assumptions. You said you're going to be looking at some of the assumptions that are built into it. One of them is the measure lifetime.
Yeah, Ben will have completed that review of the TRM, and I'm not sure he'll have time to write something up on that, but he'll be able to speak on that.
Okay, I'm just going to put your name next to it just for now then.
Okay.
Oh, I've got it locked. Okay.
Can you clarify real quick, Catherine? The expectation is that we do these write-ups before the next week's meeting?
We're not sure if the next meeting we're going to be able to get to all of these. We'd like to get to some of them. So for those of you who can, we will probably put those first on the list of things that we'll discuss. For those of you who can't get it done by then, will be pushed to the next meeting.
Okay, yeah. Reason I bring it up is I'm traveling most of next week, so it'll be challenging for me to do that. but I can certainly do it for the next one.
Great, thanks.
And Catherine, just to clarify for the measure life, our review will most likely just be looking at alignment to existing TRMs in the state. So if we have anything to write up or share, that's what it's going to be focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be if you could flag where it is inconsistent, that would be super helpful, because I don't know if anybody else has any real position on lifetime, but that is one of the things that we're supposed to be reviewing and having a position on. So we need to, you know, to put forward any concerns we have about the assumptions they've made. Any other, so we have, the eligibility criteria falls into the same category. I'm going to put your name next to that just because that's going to be part of your overall review, Emily. And I think the rest for the all clean heat measures are kind of, they're on our to-do list, but I'm not sure that we have an approach or anybody that's in a position to even begin to take those on. Because we haven't had enough. I don't think we've had enough discussion, or any discussion, in fact, on any of those topics. So we would have to take them up and see what folks are thinking about it first. So I think that's good for now, unless I'm missing something, Rick.
I don't think you are. Does anybody on the tag have any additional thoughts? Well, then we've got our assignments. And Catherine, you and I will put together a write-up with the questions, and we'll send those to OD and also to the tag.
I do wonder if there's like a, I don't know. I guess we can just do it all over the place, but if there's some consistent, if you have any input on like a consistent format that you would like to see, like level of detail or kind of structure for presenting the different options, I don't know.
I don't offhand, you know, a paragraph or two on each, as succinct as possible, then we'll take everything we get, and you know, there'll have to be at some point or another. I mean, let's think about how this could play out. Ultimately, everything comes together in a single document, and it states ultimately where the tag came out on the various issues. And one can imagine that we reached agreement on 5 of them, but didn't on others. And we would just have to say that. At that point, I would see that document as having, you know, a single editorial hand at some point for consistency and you know, format and all that. But at this point, I would just say, you know, option A, option B, here, you know, here
Pros
the
and cons, perhaps, maybe a list of, so describing the actual option. Here's option A approach to this. And then if you could just list, you know, even in bullets, here are the pros and cons for this option. Here are the pros and cons for the second option.
That's a great idea.
As simple and straightforward as possible, I think is all we're looking for.
Yep. Bullets would be great. Really good idea. Pros and cons. I like that.
Sounds good.
So we will, you know, we'll be in touch also with OD to find out what they're, I am assuming they're coming, but to clarify that and to get you a draft agenda by tomorrow, hopefully, or latest on Monday. So you'll know how the time is going to be spent and how these issues will be slotted in. And if you could tell us, if you think you will be able to get that written up by the meeting, then we'll definitely get it on the agenda. But understand that people have constraints and we didn't give you much notice. So anything you can get done would be great. All right. Well,
We've got extra time. We take a few minutes if it's okay with the tag to take public comment.
yeah, Pike.
Thanks for taking my comments again. I have been so gobsmacked by some of the comments made by the experts at ANR that I'm not even sure really where to begin. But I do want to point out that wood chips are incorrectly described in the OD measure characterization document. They describe wood chips as lumber mill waste. Wood chips never make it to the lumber mill. There's no reason to take low value wood and chip it up and then send it to a lumber mill. The wood chips are cut and chipped on site and then sent to wherever they're going to be burned. They're not lumber mill waste. Now, lumber mills do have waste and those also do get burned, but wood chips are predominantly low value wood that are chipped out in the field and then sent to wherever they're going to be burned. With that in mind, for the lumber industry and ANR specifically, terms such as waste wood, residuals, residues, these are all terms of art. And really what they mean is low value trees that have no marketable value. And that's only because we haven't yet placed a value on the storage, carbon storage and sequestration value of the wood that they're cutting up and burning. We need to recognize that, and we need to place some kind of value on that. The OD documents, and I'm afraid in the end, the TRM are going to really obfuscate a lot of the number fudging that I see that this organization is moving towards with regard to wood and biofuels. So I would ask that a clear, easy to understand statement of all counterfactuals and all assumptions are made so that everyone, non-scientists, policymakers, et cetera, can understand how burning methane can reduce greenhouse gases based on counterfactuals, and how you can justify that woods are cleaner than fossil fuels when the EPA emission factor has them almost double. I could go on and on. One question I had, or two questions, why a question for OD that wasn't conveyed to them last time was, why do they use 0.32 GWP bio rather than use 0.79 as would be appropriate for the fuel mix in Vermont? How would they define combined heat and power sources? They say EGU sources are not eligible, but what about combined heat and power? I don't think I would have believed that I would have agreed with anything Molly Willard said, but I do agree with some things. One is that consistent treatment is in order. So I think, if nothing else, this group has to start with the EPA emissions value for wood as found in the emissions hub. And then however you're going to do it, justify however you're going to do it, that number is not accurate, but you've got to start with that for consistency's sake. Thank you.
Thank you, Pike. And Laura Height?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I did send a letter in, but again, it was a little short notice for you all, but please do look at it because it almost rebuts some of the comments made by ANR today. One being, the assumption that we'll have to figure out what number you want to use, but you can't assume that all of the wood fuels used for heat in Vermont are residues or wastes. As Pike said, also, there's, can be a lot of differences of opinion about what is a waste. But even if it were only wastes, it's still not carbon neutral. And we sent some scientific papers on life cycle analysis, which indicate, the range of potential timeframes for when you might achieve just parity with natural gas, and it can be decades to a century, depending on, what fuel, whether you're using green trees or harvest residues. And then, again, and we said this before, the IPCC does not treat biomass energy as carbon neutral. That's just an erroneous assumption. I appreciate Emily's request that I ask ANR some questions, and here's my opportunity. I was wondering if ANR could provide me the Molly mentioned that they've done in-house some studies of the carbon impacts of various wood fuels. I was wondering if I could receive it, and I'll send put my email address in the chat. Brian, I was going to follow up with you. I Googled your email address. And lastly, we do have very strong concerns about the inclusion of wood heat from a public health perspective. And I think, in the development of the impacts analysis of this law, you need to factor in the health impacts from burning wood. And the law doesn't define what advanced wood heating system is. And I do recommend that we certainly have opinions on that, and the tag should probably weigh in on that as well. So it's kind of a catch-22 because the wood pellets might, may be less damaging from a public health perspective, but they're more damaging from a climate perspective because there's more embedded carbon, higher carbon intensity because of the energy used to dry them and pelletize them. On the other hand, from a health perspective, burning logs and chips releases huge amounts of air pollution, and that's already a problem in Vermont. So thank you for this opportunity to just put in a few more cents. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. Any other public comments? Yeah, so I think the comments that you've submitted, Laura, I think are through the PUC portal, I'm assuming. Okay, got it. And we can access them there.
As a party to the case, so all other comments, that section. There also were a number of good comments submitted, I believe, through the public comment section in advance of this meeting.
Okay, Rick, over to you to adjourn.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you all. I hope we covered all the issues that we wanted to. Sorry for being unclear about the agenda today. I do confess I struggled a bit with it, but I think we've gotten in a really good direction. Really appreciate all the input. Does anyone have anything to add? If not, you are released, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
I'm perfectly happy to be released. So thank you.
Take care, all.
There it is. Why can't I paste it?
No phone?
No. No, I haven't text here. Let's see what she said. Julia. Nope, haven't heard from her again.
Okay. Maybe she's coming, maybe she's not. Maybe she's forgotten.
Why can I not get this to save as preview file, export, share, print, rename, save, move to. There you go. There you go. Here's my project. I can't.